I'd like to pull up Dr. Lockwood now, who's going to be, Rick, you don't have slides, right?
Correct.
Okay. You'll see, this is Rick Lockwood. He is a faculty member in the School of Community Health, a sociologist by training, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, and teaches classes on research methods. Those of you who are in the Bridges program know Dr. Lockwood well, and he is here today and tomorrow to, we have a few of them in here, to focus on introduction to research. There's a bunch within that, and I'll get out of the way and let you introduce yourself.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, people, so I'm passing around a syllabus, and I'm running about 10 minutes late because someone tried to steal my truck last night. I know. And it's parked in a place where they're going to give me a ticket if I don't move, but I had one of those clubs, and they drilled the club, right? But they didn't get through it, but I had to be here, so I couldn't really deal with it, so I might be getting a ticket. And so as the syllabus goes around, the last few didn't get stapled. Okay, so I made, I think, about 60 copies. There might be enough for everybody. And also, I'm going to leave my phone on just in case I need to get from the cops or from the locksmith. Okay, so please forgive me. So actually, I need a copy of the syllabus too. Part of what we decided was that in this concept of introducing research, one of the things that's valuable for people who are moving into this new identity as a researcher, right, following on the last discussion, is to take in potential role models, right, to recognize people who have moved into this field of work, to choose among them and find someone that's inspirational. Thank you so much, right? And so from that point of view, I mean, starting out with my own personal story is offered to show you one option for moving into the world of research, okay? There are many options, right? There's many ways to move into the world of research, and primarily, I think what you need to find is someone that you relate to, right? Someone whose career path you relate to, and to begin as a first step to emulate them, right? Find somebody, see how they moved into their position, and learn about them. But there's many options. A bit of advice I got from one of my mentors is this: people who set goals tend to achieve them, right? But there's another pattern, which is to be opportunistic, right? To take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves, okay? So let's look at the syllabus really quickly and see where we're going to go. So I'm Dr. Lockwood. I have a PhD in system science and sociology. It's happening. Really? Okay. You know, I found that passing the syllabus around is one of the most challenging tasks for me. It's really fascinating. Because, of course, do you go in rows and columns, right? When you have the choice, do you go behind you or in front of you? And you know, that kind of reinforces the point. I didn't intend to say this, but every decision you make is like a flow chart, right? It's like a spreading, well, in psychology they used to call it spreading activation. From here goes to there, you make a choice, and there goes to there, you make a choice, right? And actually that metaphor kind of explains my pathway to being right here in front of me. Right? Before we get there, let's take a look at this. Okay, so I'm Dr. Lockwood. You can call me Dr. Lockwood or Professor. And I prefer that from an identity formation point of view because I'm very casual. Do you see how casual I am? Right? And so in learning that you were going to come off of a lecture about identity formation, right, which is a very active area of research in a field called social psychology, right? Social psychology actually is present in sociology departments and psychology departments. Okay? Sociologists tend to talk about identity formation, and psychologists tend to talk about senses of self, right? So at this stage where you're transitioning from, for example, community college into the university, one of the things that you are reinforcing for yourself is this new identity or a concept of who you are, yourself. Right? And you get cues and feedback from the social environment to establish whether or not your claim that, yes, I'm scientific, is actually validated by people who have proven that they are scientific. Right? Does that make sense? And I'm using scientific here in a very general way. And today we're going to talk about the differences between qualitative research and quantitative research. And so please don't take offense if I say the word science in here. And it leads to the assumptions of experiments and numbers and mathematical equations, okay? Because there's lots of ways to be scientific. All right, anyway. I teach many courses for PSU. I take over my time here. I've taught 12 different courses in 4 different departments. For about 10 years, I've been situated in the School of Community Health. And there, I regularly teach a course about the American healthcare system, which is very complicated. And I teach a course on global health, and I teach a course on film and health, which is really great for senioritis. I'm most excited in that I've recently been accepted into the graduate faculty teaching research methods, our topic for today. Right? So I teach social research methods, which has people go through a proposal writing process, which is what you all have to do, right? Find an area of study, figure out a question, articulate what you plan to do in a way that is appreciated by the people who care about you, right? So they can give you guidance and redirection and things like that. So I do that for the grad students, and then I teach several other courses at the grad level on occasion. My office is over in the urban building, which is over where the streetcar passes, right? Have you all had a tour already? Do you know the campus? Move your heads. No? Yes? Okay. So it's over at the, by where the streetcar is, by Ben and Jerry's, right? Meeting poles, kind of locations. And you can come visit me, okay? You can come visit me. I give you an open invitation to come talk to me about stuff if you'd like. I very much enjoy my job, right? I very much enjoy my job. I have a sense of professionalism about my job despite my brand new Chuck Taylors. And part of that is to mentor folks like this, right? So I'm around for half of the summer. I'm working with an honors student for the rest of the summer, a McNair student, and an independent research, all of them traveling abroad and coming back to write up research papers with me by August. Okay? So I'll be around. So these are my digits, and you can get a hold of me there. Okay? Very quickly. This course provides an introduction to the research process. Students are presented with the philosophical, methodological, analytical, and communicative aspects of the process. This course emphasizes 4 methodological types, though others are touched upon as well. These areas of emphasis are survey and field research, content analysis, and experimentation. So my goal for today and tomorrow is to talk a little bit about each of those, but the way I'm going to talk about those is in their role in an overall investigative process, right? So when you are an investigator and you are intellectually driven to advance knowledge, one of the choices is what tools you will apply, right? What tools are you going to apply in your pursuit of knowledge? And one of the goals is for you all, I love this metaphor, I love the metaphor of a toolbox. And you, as intellectuals, will, over time, collect new tools that you can put in your toolbox and bust them out when you need to. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. And of course, you should, find things that resonate with you, that reinforce your own self-identity. And maybe you're good with numbers, and so being very quantitative and using statistical methods is the way to go. And maybe numbers aren't your strong suit today, but remember, you always get better at what you practice, right? There's a lot of rigorous approaches to investigating, to producing new knowledge that are based in words and concepts and not numbers, okay? So we can talk about that. And then there's the grade, which is kind of newish. The grade approach, and you know what, here at PSU we have an internationally recognized expert on this next topic, the topic of mixed methods. So you can take qualitative approaches and quantitative approaches and use them in sequence, to build stronger arguments. Okay? All right, so these are the course objectives very quickly. Introduce concepts related to the research process, introduce a lexicon. What's the word lexicon mean? Vocabulary, but is it synonymous with vocabulary? Okay, so how is it different? Not all at once. Anyone?
It's more specialized than
Specific
generic vocabulary.
Yes, thank you so much. It's specialized vocabulary, right? right? So a lexicon is contextual. It is the words that are appropriate for the topic at hand, right? Whatever we're doing. So I want to share with you this. When you enroll in a course and you pay money for it, what do you expect to purchase for your money? Knowledge, right? Knowledge. But at the very least, at the simplest level, one of the things you can conceptualize this, right? You're buying new words, right? And so every time you go into a brand new course, you might say to yourself, what are the new words that I'm going to learn for this course, right? And what are my new words? And the big hint is, if you learn the new words as soon as possible, you will do well on the exam, assuming that there's a verbal component. Right? You know, of course, there are mathematical. There's courses that are mathematical where words are minimized, right? Where you're writing out things in formal logic, math. But nonetheless, there's concepts, right, and then subdisciplines and labels that you will need to understand, even when you're absorbing and crystallizing, you know, the concepts that come in the world of quantitative analysis. Third point, introduce basic methodological choices for conducting research. Introduce options for data analysis. Introduce formatting and style for technical writing. Okay, so I hope that we can get through all this stuff by the end of tomorrow. Okay? Yeah, and time limited. I don't know if I'm going to have you do any exercises. This is kind of an adaptation, but we'll see. And classroom politics, I'm not going to go over that. Okay. So on page 2 is a script of where I hope to go with our conversation today. Okay? And like I said before, at this formative stage, one of the things that I hope you do is find somebody that you resonate with, right? Somebody that you find to be interesting, and approach them and share with them, like, hey, given our introductory time, I think I want to talk to you more, right? And this also happens in the course of school. Finding that teacher that you want to know more about is, well, fundamentally, there's a personality trait. You need to be curious about the people who teach you, right? And it's easy, of course, especially in a society that values apathy or something like that, to be dismissive of your instructors, but you all, as the anointed ones, should act, right, on this interest that you have and approach the professors that you find interesting and intriguing, because everybody has an interesting backstory and everybody will have their own advice about how to build a career. Okay? So I'm definitely not an authority on this topic, but one of the things that I enjoy doing is translating esoteric points into common language. Okay? So if you find that I am speaking about something that isn't clear, please raise your hand and I'll try and reframe it. Okay? So that this idea comes from information theory. I am the communicator, you are the receiver, and hopefully a message is transmitting, right? Getting from me to you. But if you don't understand, then the message is incomplete, right? And so there's a little responsibility on your part to say, you're breaking up, I don't understand. Okay? All right, so I'm going to start with my own personal story. My own personal story is fundamentally similar to yours. My mom's from Mexico. My mom's a naturalized citizen. She went to boarding school in the United States, and the people at the boarding school liked her. And so upon graduation, I think she was approaching commencement, and the principal of the school she went to came up to her and said, Edelmira, that's her name, we have money for you to go to college. And my mom likes to describe herself as a bumblebee. I guess, according to the physics, bumblebees are not supposed to be able to fly given the size of their wings and their body mass, but they fly anyway. And so my mom was like, oh, I don't know, I just keep going and things are okay, right? Which is really fascinating, because what that is a picture of taking advantage of opportunity rather than setting her goals. Like, oh, I can't wait to go to college, right? Going to college for my mom was a surprise. So she went to college, and she went to college in Kansas City, Missouri, and on a scholarship. And in that first year, she met the guy that would be my dad, right? and then they got married, and about a year later, I came along. Right? This was a former Christian school, so they had married dorms, right? So they lived in the married dorms, and so that means that my very first home was a university. Skipping way forward, I mean, my dad became a counselor, right, a marriage family counselor at the master's level, and he studied psychology to do that, and was very psychological. And so I grew up in a family, until they got divorced, right? I grew up in a family that thought about psychology a lot. And so that, of course, shaped my view of the world. One of the things that came out of that approach, especially when my dad was in grad school, was the value of introspection, right? Learning about yourself, examining who you are, and thinking about that in a helpful way, not in an obsessive way. And during my development, I took many personality tests to see what they said about who I am and what I should do, right? What's so fascinating about the personality exams, the tests that I've taken, is that I've done them longitudinally, same test over time. And they tend to report the same results, leading to what we call external validity, right? We get this idea that time after time after time, we get the same results, okay? Even though I've gone through many experiences. One of these tests is called the Strong Interest Inventory, which is good for career counseling. And the Strong Interest Inventory says that the best job for me in the whole wide world is university professor. I hope this for you, right? I hope that in your path of development that you introspect and find yourself, you know, as a mature adult participating in the economy, doing something that is consistent with your personality, right? With what you should be doing. Now, like I said before, people who set goals tend to achieve them, but that's separate from being opportunistic, right? My path to here has been opportunistic. So I ended up going to a state school like this, a commuter school, the University of Texas at El Paso. The discussion inside my family, especially after divorce, was, don't worry, you'll go to college. Right? No discussion of types of colleges, no discussion of prep, no worries. Of course, this was back when we wrote on stone tablets. But no real counseling and decision-making about strategizing the entry into the university, none of that. It was simply this: don't worry, son. I mean, Couchton, you're very smart, the test says so, right? You're very smart, the test says so, so don't worry, you go to college. And then, they didn't say these words, but it was kind of like, good luck, and you'll pay for it yourself. So, which I did, right? I paid for my college on my own. The University of Texas at El Paso is an interesting place, and as a matter of fact, it is the national leader for advancing minorities through higher ed. El Paso is on the Mexican border, right? It's the westernmost city of Texas. I was very interested in psychology, and most of us, as you know, historically, people generally end up doing the trades of their parents, right? And historically, men are the people who have toiled while women have toiled and paid and owned, right? So historically, we could say that men tend to take over the family business, right? That's, I mean, literally historically, like centuries, millennia back, right? Now, thankfully, after the feminist revolution, we can say these things, that people generally are influenced by the careers of their parents, right? Does that make sense? So, my interest in psychology was formed normally in wanting to be like your dad, right? And so I went in as a freshman declaring a psych major, and I finished a psych major, right? So that's kind of fun. Most people change their major once or twice. Right? They explore and make a choice. Because I was on financial aid and I paid for my own education, then that meant that I had work study. And one of the things that your mentors do is they write grants. And when you write a grant, you're more likely to get awarded if you put into the grant funding for students. Right? So the grant that my mentors wrote had funding for work study students, and I was a work study student. And I was nerdy. So, as a nerdy kid in a psychology class where nerdiness would be enthusiasm, diligence, studiousness, right? I evidently stood out to the TA, who was a grad student, and she, Cindy Larson, thank you, Cindy Larson, said, hey, Lockwood, you're work study, right? Yeah. It's like, we need someone on this grant who's work study. It's like, yeah. He said, you should do this, right? That was what was so great about it. She told me, you should do this. And I was like, okay. So I started working on a grant as an undergraduate in a university. That decision right there led me to here. Do you understand? That's at what we might call a bifurcation point, right? A split, a fork in the road, okay? Where somebody recognized that I was into something and there was money and a structure for me to continue my own development, right? And in that environment, the topic was Alzheimer's disease, trying to develop screening tools for early onset Alzheimer's disease. And as you know, Alzheimer's disease is a progressive dementia where people lose their memories, right? And your brain actually shrivels up and it binds aluminum and it builds plaques like plaque on your teeth. And back in the day, we thought that Alzheimer's disease was one thing, and I think current research, even though I don't keep up with it, thinks that Alzheimer's disease is about 5 different things, okay? So we've advanced knowledge about that. This grant had 3 aspects. It had a biochemical aspect where we were looking at proteins, right, acetylcholine, and acetylcholineesterase's role in the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. It had a paper and pencil component where we did psychological and personality and neuropsych tests to see if we could screen for people who were starting to lose their memories. And the problem with that is that if people are really depressed, it looks like they're losing their memory because they just don't care, they're not responsive, right? So we have to screen out depression versus Alzheimer's disease. And then lastly, there was this component where we read people's brain waves called EEG, right? So in the university, I learned how to read brain waves, and when I graduated, I got a job at the hospital reading brain waves, right? So it is true that you can go to the university and get an employable skill. For me, right, it's not just fill your brain, right? It's not just hang out for a few years, right, and figure out what you're gonna do. But literally, I picked up an employable skill that then situated me inside the healthcare industry, where I've been ever since. Now, as an undergrad, as a kid who wanted to emulate his father, then I thought, well, maybe I should be a clinical psychologist, and embedded in that idea is that you need a PhD, right? But the concept of striving for a PhD was not the superficial goal. It was just kind of embedded in the concept that I would be a clinical psychologist and that I would be able to help people analyzing their psychology, right? But in order to do that, you'd have to earn the PhD. So I want to get this point across is that even though this was kind of what we might call an instrumental step in achieving this identity that I valued, it wasn't central. What it did, though, is mean that it led to the assumption that I would leave undergrad and go to grad school in psychology and do a master's, and then I'd go and get a PhD in psychology, and I would be a psychologist. Right? That was the case. Life happens, though, as well, right? I was engaged to get married, right? I had a fiance, and we wanted to leave El Paso, Texas. So we got married, and we left El Paso, Texas, and moved here. But what that did was it limited my ability to continue as a psychology graduate student. Here at PSU, here in this city, right here where I moved for lifestyle choices, didn't have a strong neuro component for the master's level, right? So I came here and thought, well, I still aspire to higher ed, it's just I might not be able to do it here. Furthermore, I had worked in hospitals reading brainwaves, and when I got here to Portland, Oregon, the hospital environment had changed. We had gone through something called health system formation, where independent hospitals became parts of systems. And when that happens, then the umbrella corporation that owns the hospitals tries to save money by getting rid of redundancies, and the best place to do that is in labs, redundant labs, right? And so the EEG people were all let go. The remaining people would carry beepers and drive to wherever they were needed. Right? So I arrived up here, even though I had checked out the work environment, and there were no more brain jobs, so I had to redirect. And I ended up selling my research skills and my neurodiagnostic skills, and you know who bought them? Weird. An orthopedic surgeon. An orthopedic surgeon who specialized in hands and arms. And he said, well, as part of the differential diagnosis, we need to make sure your peripheral nerves are working, and if they are, then the problem is either muscle or bone. Okay. So I worked there for 7 years, and all the while I would come to the PSU campus and take a class here or there. Very intrigued by the discipline called system science. You should look it up. It's really interesting. And ultimately realized that as an intellectual working in a hospital environment that I didn't know how healthcare worked, and that became intriguing. So then I earned a master's degree in health administration and policy, which is essentially the master's degree in how does the healthcare system work. Now, as a professor, that's my bread and butter. I teach that all the time, right? And it's been interesting with Obamacare to have that as an area of expertise. Now the people who come through our department pretty much have to come through my class as a requirement, right? So I have the honor and the responsibility of interacting with all of our undergraduate students in our major. The Master of Public Health, though, is what we call a professional degree. So the goal is to prepare you for work out in the world. Okay? Its goal is not to teach you how to write a thesis or a dissertation. I, as a curious person, wanted to take that next step to do original research. And original research is required at the PhD level. You all now are going to build skills in research that will help you when you get to the PhD level. Right? They will also help you if you do a master's that requires a thesis where you have to do research, okay? But nonetheless, you have an early start with this program, congratulations, on building the skills that you're going to need for later. The PhD that I earned was in sociology and system science, and the type of sociologist I am has a name. It's called medical sociology. And from that perspective, medical sociology helps us theorize, conceptualize, right, intellectualize the stuff that I learned at the master's level. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, what's the value of hearing my story? Part of the value is that there is a stereotype of your career advancement through the academy of becoming increasingly refined, right? The traditional model is for somebody to move from their undergraduate major to getting a master's degree in the same discipline, and then a PhD in that same discipline, right? A process of increasing refinement. And from that, you become clearly an expert. You have expertise. My path is much more a path of the generalist. I moved from psychology to public health to sociology, right? And from that perspective, I have a unique perspective, unique context for understanding some of the social problems that we address intellectually in the academy. Does that make sense? It makes me a good teacher, too. Did I tell you I won Teacher of the Year? How could I not have told you this? I won Teacher of the Year for 2013-14, and my bio now says, and sadly came in second for this year. So, and number 2. So do you understand what I'm laying out here is that there's many different pathways to professionalism, right? There's many different pathways to your own personal success. In the academy, there's a pathway of refinement where you stay within a discipline and working increasingly esoteric points, right? Which is important. As a matter of fact, when you do that, you you become authoritative. And when you're authoritative, people seek you for guidance. Okay? The other path is to take opportunities as they unfold. You all have been approached to be here, you took the opportunity, and so you know what that feels like, right? It's like, oh, it's summer, I could be at the beach. Or I could be in the classroom at PSU, right? Hopefully this will pay off. Does that make sense? Hopefully it will pay off. I think it will. Right? So I moved from discipline to discipline, and so while they are all generally social science, they do include an appreciation of science, right, and being scientific. And from my point of view, they're nested within one another, right? So rather than this refinement, it's more like I've built a hierarchy of context around what we do, okay? All right, so let's go to the second bullet point, right? The second bullet point, and what's my time here? I have, gosh, is it only 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Something like that. Okay, that's fine. How many people here are going to pursue research in the natural sciences? Okay, we have a few. How many people here are going to pursue research in the social sciences? Okay, and is there any other broad category of what we do at the university? Natural sciences, social sciences, third one? Arts and letters, humanities, I like to call it the humanities, right? 3 broad areas of intellectual activity, okay? So we're here to talk about science, and it's important to recognize that science is a form of logic, right? Science is a form of logic. It's a form of logic that is very important, right? It is a form of epistemology. How many people have heard that word before? Epistemology, right? Epistemology is a branch of physics which generally means how do we make new knowledge? How do we make new knowledge? The study of making new knowledge, right? And so you can make new knowledge in many ways. One way is science, but another way is through profound introspection, and that's what the Dalai Lama does, for example. And so the natural sciences and the social sciences both agree that using the principles of science is the main way that we will investigate and make new knowledge. Okay? What this leads to is a general appreciation that though you will be in different disciplines, right, and disciplines are housed in physical locations that we call departments. And departments can be very complicated, especially like if you go up to OHSU, you can have a department that's spread over many buildings, right? But nonetheless, disciplines are housed in departments. You will all be in different departments, right? But you will be using a common way of thinking. And the common way of thinking is simplistically science, right? How to move systematically through an investigation, how to pose research questions based on collecting grounding information, doing preliminary research, leading to an incisive, specific hypothesis about your area of investigation, right? And then having tools for controlling or yeah, I guess controlling would be good. Tools for controlling the different sources of variation that could happen in the world, right? So that the one thing you're interested in is the only thing that is free to vary. The classical example of that is the experiment, right? So we all learn about experiments in high school, and generally the definition of an experiment is a structured investigation that controls all aspects of the situation except for your variable of interest, right? We do that in various ways. We try and assert control through randomizing subject selection. We try and control by randomizing exposures to your treatments or your, I'm blanking on the word, interventions. And then we also have control over the analysis part, right? So one of the big differences, okay, listen to me now. One of the big differences between the natural sciences and the social sciences is the natural sciences tend to approach control for science through experimental design, right? So you have treatment groups and placebo groups, control groups, right? You control the level of exposure. If it was a drug, you'd have low dose, medium dose, high dose, right? The research designer is the one who imposes control on all of the potential variation. In the social sciences, we often control for those things statistically by having a multivariate statistical model where we can put in a number of things first into the model and solve for those, and then second, put in your target variable of interest after we've controlled statistically for all this other stuff, right? So imagine that you're interested in academic performance and you want to control for age, gender, ethnicity. You might put those into your statistical model first and see what happens, and then stick in your academic variable. And after you've controlled for all that stuff, we say that academics performs over and above these confounding or control variables, right? Bottom line, the natural sciences tend to control things through experimentation. The social sciences tend to control things statistically. Okay? If you're going to do a survey and create big statistical models, then you would control statistically, right? You're not putting people into little groups. But in the natural sciences, you definitely have the opportunity to control the way your research subjects, or more generally, the objects of your research are treated. In both the natural sciences and the social sciences, we have research laboratories. Now, I really like to talk about the history of the laboratory. Think about this. It's fun to think about the laboratory from a movie's perspective. Picture Frankenstein, right? And the reason I like to bring that up is because that, that takes place in the late 1800s, and it helps put this in historical context. In the long history of human curiosity, there have always been people who had invented things to solve a problem, right? As a matter of fact, now we see that apes do it too, right? Chimpanzees can invent new ways to get ants out of the anthill, right? So it seems that we and our primate cousins use tools to figure things out, right? So in this long history of human curiosity, there have always been people that have invented new ways of doing things, and there's some people whose personalities have been oriented towards that. We might call them the tinkers, right? The inventions, who have a shop, and they invent machines to do things, okay? The laboratory started out that way. It was the place where we keep the fancy machines. Okay? Now that became more generalized after the Industrial Revolution. Remember, at one time there was the first microscope, right? At one time there was the first microscope, and if you wanted to see tiny stuff, you would have to go to the microscope. You'd have to travel to go there because it was unique in the world, right? It was an invention. After the Industrial Revolution, which then made mass production easy and cost-effective, microscopes could be everywhere, right? And once microscopes were everywhere, then we realized that, hey, it's germs that cause disease and not miasma, right? Stinky air. Once you have a microscope in every doctor's office, then it's easy to say, look at these microbes. That's what the problem is, right? Does that make sense? So, laboratories, much like hospitals, are the places generally where we have the equipment, right? In the natural sciences, it's important that you, as new people in the laboratory, behave appropriately because the equipment can be dangerous, right? So in the natural sciences, we tend to have an approach that preserves the environment without external interference. We usually try and keep it clean. One way we signify keeping it clean is make everybody wear a white lab coat, right? In transitioning from where you are to where you will be, one of the things you will internalize is a lot of the cultural aspects of doing science, right? The cultural aspects of being in a laboratory setting. Much of this is for your own safety. If you were in a hard sciences lab and it's characterized by having to wear a lab coat, then you probably shouldn't have your hair dangling down to fall into a Bunsen burner, right? You probably shouldn't have open-toed shoes where you can drop acid onto your toes, right? These kinds of things are generally safety-oriented, okay? So the culture of a laboratory in the natural sciences is generally oriented around safety, okay? I'm going to come back to this environment in just a second. In the social sciences, we also have labs, right? In the social sciences, we tend to have laboratories that are outfitted with analysis tools, like computers loaded with appropriate software, right? Now, the emergence of a social science lab comes from the history of the hard science lab, right? So there are many cultural crossovers, but safety isn't necessarily one of the main issues, right? What does cross over is the sense of seriousness, the professionalism, right, that is required in a laboratory setting. The professionalism of a laboratory setting is this. Laboratories are physical and also social locations where serious work is done. So we need people to be serious. We need them to aspire to professional comportment, which means that there is a hierarchy of authority. There's someone in charge of the lab. They may delegate to a mid-level person, perhaps a TA, perhaps a professor's in charge. A TA supervises, and then they have the laborer who will do the tasks of the day, right? What that means is that somebody has to figure out the division of labor, who's going to do what, due dates, right, accountability. Part of that accountability is to be punctual, to be ready to work when you're there, so it's just like having a job, right? And to be careful. In a laboratory, your work is as valuable as your care for it, right? Now think about this. The scientific process calls for precision, right? Being specific, being accurate, building into your measurements reliability and validity, right? So when you come to be employed inside a laboratory environment, there's a lot of trust imbued into you, right? We accept you to work here, but we don't accept anybody to work here, right? Do you understand? So there's a responsibility to step up to, and the thing though that's different, this is what's so interesting about it, is that it doesn't always feel authoritative, right? It doesn't feel like you could get fired if you mess up, but you can. There's no time clock. Sometimes there is, but not usually, right? So honesty is assumed as part of your professionalism, part of your personal integrity, right? Responsibility, of course, because what? The work you do will build into the final report. So if you mess up and nobody knows, then you are creating wrong knowledge, right? Misinformation. And that, of course, would be invalid. It would invalidate the entire research if you are wrong, right? If you mess up. Now, we're all human here, right? And one of the great characteristics of humanity is fallibility, right? We mess up, okay? However, because that's a feature of the human story, then matching responsibility to error is expected. If you make an error, if you report it, everybody understands that happens, right? Overall, the laboratory is the place where we make the observations, the empirical observations, the calculated observations that will then feed into the more intellectual analyses that will be done by the supervisors in the lab, right? So your role is fundamentally important. Fundamentally important, right? It's essential that when you do the work with your mentors, that if you need help, you ask for help, right? If you don't know what's going on, that's okay, especially in the beginning. You need to articulate, you need to advocate for yourself to be a good and reliable lab worker, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, why would it be bad to make wrong knowledge? At the very least, the grant you work on has been funded by a grant-giving institution. The grant you work on won over others. It is competitive. And if out of this lab bad knowledge came, then what's the likelihood of getting another grant? Small. So there is a financial consequence for everybody, right, if incorrect knowledge is produced, if you produce something that is off the mark, right? So there's consequences here, and it is that high-stakes nature of grant funding that also gives the rationale for firing you if you mess up, right? Do you understand? Because there's a lot at stake. Let's see. So I've gone through a lot of this stuff already, and what I want to finish up with is you all have declared that you have a personality trait, a fundamental personality trait of being curious, curiosity, right? You've declared that from this curiosity you embrace intellectualism. You embrace the idea of moving through the world thoughtfully, right? And of being abstract and theoretical in processing the world. Being able to say to yourself or others, I see this happening, and you know why that is? Let me tell you why that is, right? We could say, it's the third law, second law of thermodynamics, we would say. That's why that is, right? And that, just simply saying something like that, is being intellectual, right? You're saying, I'm making an observation, and I have a theoretical context for it, right? We just say, this person is too attached to their mom, we could use Freud for that, right? We could be theoretical about that, okay? We value this here. We want you to be intellectual. We want to share with you the theories and the ideas that guide us, that help us be happy people in the world, right? And so from this point of view, you are welcome into a context where everybody pretty much likes to talk about their own work, right? Everyone could give you guidance on their own theoretical orientations, especially if you ask, right? The flip side is that we're all busy, right? It's a very busy environment. It's an environment where people are necessarily focused on the task of the day, and so they may not really be thinking about your needs on any given day, right? While the feature of professionalism is to mentor the next generation, that's you, on any given day we might be busy. So you need to advocate for yourself, okay? You need to advocate for yourself. What that leads to is the last few bullet points is that we hope that you bring into this environment this sense of, first of all, curiosity, enthusiasm, what we might call an investigative mindset, right? And that you are ready to apply what's often overused, critical thinking, right? I think it's overused because sometimes people mean cynicism, and it's not cynicism. It's about attention to detail and a thoughtful reflection on whether that makes sense. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now tomorrow when I come back, what we'll be talking about more is the specific methods like quantitative research and then qualitative research, right? And then we'll frame on top of that the role of ethics in research. And that's very, very important. It's essential that we have, like I spoke about a little bit today, the idea that you are in service towards the truth, right? Even though there can be incentives for immediate, maybe financial or egotistical payoff, right? There are conflicts that we need to discuss, and we'll talk about the general history of ethical concerns in research. Okay? Do we have any questions before I go? Don't hesitate. John, I think that's it, right?
Great.
Okay, thank you.